The R&D Tax Incentive portal has a new application for registration form. This video is focused on the project and activity data which applicants are now required to include. Opening up the project and activities table for a previously drafted application, we're going to look in detail at the questions required for project, core and supporting activities. Let's have a look at the project level questions. As well as the name for a project, you need to include the month and year for the duration of this project and how much is expected to be spent over the lifetime of the project. Then you are required to outline the objectives of the project within a 1,000 character limit. Please note, as you enter characters, there's a character count on the bottom right-hand corner of the text box. Continuing down the project form, you then need to include how much was spent on feedstock inputs, and then for the selected income period, where in Australia did you conduct most of the R&D activities? This is recorded on a postcode level. And then finally, you need to enter the ANZ research codes for the division and group, which covered the majority of activities undertaken in this project. Let's have a look at the core activity questions. Opening up our previously entered core activity. After you have entered a name for your core activity, and please note, if you have registered this core activity before, please use the same name. And then you've connected the core activity to the project that it relates to. Assuming this core activity commenced within the income period for this application, we're going to have a look at the questions that you need to address, as well as the start and end dates for the core activity. You now need to include the estimated expenditure for this core activity. And this is a change from the previous application process. Working down the form, you then need to articulate the hypothesis within a maximum of 4,000 characters, and you can use the drop-down help text to remind yourself of the definitions of hypothesis and also the requirements within the legislation. Scrolling down further, you are next asked to explain what was the experiment or experiments that you conducted and how did they test the hypothesis listed above. Next, you need to describe how you evaluate or plan to evaluate the results from your experiment. And then if you reach conclusions from your experiment in the selected income period, describe those conclusions. These three fields have a maximum of 4,000 characters. Then you're asked whether the core activity was conducted for the substantial purpose of generating new knowledge. Remembering that new knowledge can be general or applied. And the substantial purpose is described in the help drop-down text. You will then be asked to describe the new knowledge that this core activity was intended to produce within a limit of 1,000 characters. Finally, for the core activities, you're asked using a series of tick boxes to identify how the company determined that the outcome could not be known in advance. The other box will give you the ability to use free text within 1,000 characters to explain what sources were investigated. And then the last set of boxes are for you to show what evidence the company kept about this core activity. And again, selecting the other box will provide a text box, in this case limited to 1,000 characters. Finally, let's have a look at the supporting activity questions. So again, the name and the related core activity. The month and year that the supporting activity was conducted during. Then you're asked, how did this activity directly support the core activities with a maximum of 1,000 characters? Like the core activity, you are also required to give the estimated expenditure for this supporting activity. And then briefly describe what the supporting activity was within a maximum of 1,000 characters. And finally, whether the activity produced the goods or service or is directly related to the production of a good or service. One last thing that we should point out in the core activity section. If the core activity that you're documenting in this application commenced after the end of your income period, in this question you select yes. You then have a subset of questions to answer. So just adjusting the dates for my core activity so that they now fall after the financial year, but within the dates of the whole project. The questions that you need to respond to is just to give a brief description of the intended hypothesis for this core activity. Future core activities do not require experimental or results definitions. So that's just a quick overview of the new fields required for the projects and activities sections of the R&D registration form in the new customer portal.